It doesn't begin with a storm. It begins with silence. Not the kind that comes after an argument. Not the kind that slams doors or sends messages left on read. But a silence that spreads slowly, like fog. A silence that whispers, you are no longer being seen. You feel it in the little things. Their absence in your joy. Their detachment in your pain. The way they nod instead of respond. The way your presence no longer stirs theirs. And still, you stay. You stay because the love is real. Because what you feel is not ordinary. Because part of you believes that if you just hold on a little longer, if you love them a little deeper, they'll remember what it was like to reach for you. But the truth grows louder. Not in words. In tension. In the space between what you give and what comes back hollow. There's no fight. No drama, no explosion, just a quiet moment. When you realize you've been loving someone alone, that's the breaking point no one sees. The one where your heart doesn't scream, it surrenders. Not because the love has died, but because it can no longer survive where it isn't nurtured. This is not the kind of breakup people write songs about. It's not loud or cinematic. It's a slow erosion of self. A slow sacrifice of your needs, your voice, your worth. Until one day, you look in the mirror and don't recognize who stayed so long for so little. And so, you make the decision, not out of anger, not out of pride, but out of something far more sacred. Peace. The kind of peace that says, this isn't what love is supposed to feel like. The kind of peace that no longer confuses intensity with intimacy. The kind that whispers, you can still love them and leave. Because staying doesn't prove your devotion. It only proves you're willing to abandon yourself. And so, you don't slam the door. You don't send the angry message. You don't wait for them to understand. You just begin to walk away. Softly, gently, finally. And they won't hear you go. Not right away. But one day, when the noise of the world quiets, they'll notice what's missing. And it won't be the sound of your voice. It'll be the feeling of being truly seen. A feeling they didn't know how to hold. Until it was gone. The psychology of staying too long. You didn't stay because you were weak. You stayed because something in you was still waiting for love to feel like home. This isn't just about them. The person who grew cold, who pulled away, who gave you less and called it love. This is about what was triggered in you. Something ancient, something buried. The anxious part of you that remembers inconsistency as familiarity. The child in you who learned that love often means working harder, earning affection, reading silence as your fault. And so you tolerated things that didn't feel right. Not because you didn't know better, but because your nervous system was trained to accept emotional starvation as normal. When they pulled away, you didn't walk. You reached. You reasoned with their distance. You excused their shutdowns. You convinced yourself that if you could just be more patient, more understanding, more agreeable, they would soften again. They would return to the warmth they showed you in the beginning. But that beginning wasn't the truth. It was the hook. Avoidance often gives just enough to awaken your hope, but not enough to sustain your heart. It's a dance between emotional presence and emotional retreat. A rhythm you start to memorize until your own needs feel like interruptions. You shrink your voice, manage your reactions, and slowly begin to overfunction for the relationship. This is how trauma bonds form, not through cruelty, but through inconsistency. It's the hope that keeps you stuck. The idea that the old them might come back. That if you can just prove your love, they'll stop being afraid of it. But love should never require this kind of self-erasure. You're not supposed to feel like a stranger to yourself just to be chosen. And yet, when you think of leaving, guilt rises. Not because they made you feel safe, but because you've internalized their avoidance as your failure. You start asking, what if I was too sensitive? What if I was too much? What if they did love me, but didn't know how to show it? So you stay a little longer, and then a little more, until one day you realize the pain of holding on has finally outweighed the fear of letting go. Because staying too long doesn't protect you from heartbreak. It just prolongs the illusion. And illusions are costly. They cost you time. They cost you clarity. They cost you the parts of yourself you once guarded like sacred ground. It's not about blaming yourself. It's about understanding the emotional patterns that kept you hooked. So many people confuse attachment with love. But love doesn't erode you. It doesn't make you feel invisible in the name of connection. The truth is, you stayed because your body remembered something, and it thought repeating the pattern might finally give you a different ending. But now you're awake, and awareness changes everything. The moment you begin to see that love should not cost your peace is the moment you stop trying to bargain for crumbs. You don't have to hate them. You don't have to prove them wrong. You just have to honor what your nervous system has been trying to tell you for a long, long time. This love is hurting you more than it's healing you. And sometimes, the bravest thing you'll ever do is stop explaining your needs to someone committed to misunderstanding them. Why they didn't see your worth. They didn't see your worth, not because it wasn't there, but because they were never taught how to recognize. What doesn't play hard to get, doesn't punish, doesn't pull away. To an avoidant, closeness often feels like a trap. Affection threatens their autonomy. Vulnerability feels like exposure, not connection. And someone like you who offered open arms and emotional presence terrified them. You weren't the problem. You were the mirror. And mirrors are dangerous to those who spend their lives avoiding themselves. Because your presence didn't flatter their ego. It triggered their fear. Fear that they wouldn't be able to meet your emotional depth. Fear that intimacy would reveal their inadequacy. Fear that if they let you in, you'd see the parts of them they've never learned to love. So instead of leaning in, they pulled back. Not because you were too much, but because the light you brought made their shadow impossible to ignore. You see, it's not uncommon for avoidance to mistake emotional safety for suffocation when they've lived in survival mode long enough. Calm feels like danger. Consistency feels like pressure. Love, real, grounded love, feels like something that must be escaped. So they withdraw. They go quiet. They stop reciprocating the effort you pour in like oxygen. And the more available you are, the more invisible you begin to feel. This is the cruel paradox of loving someone avoidant. The very love that would nourish them overwhelms them. And the more you give, the more they feel controlled. Even when you're just trying to connect. It wasn't about your worth. It was about their capacity. They couldn't hold space for you because they never learned how to hold space for themselves. You were asking them to step into a relationship that required emotional risk, and they've spent their whole life avoiding that very thing. But that doesn't mean they didn't feel something for you. It just means what they felt and what they were capable of expressing were never going to align. And here's the truth no one tells you. They may never find someone who sees them the way you did. Not because you're easy to replace, but because most people won't offer what you did without demanding it back in return. You offered love without condition, support without shame, presence without pretense. They didn't see your worth because worth wasn't the language they knew how to speak. They only understood chase. They only respected distance. They only responded to tension. So when you came in soft, they mistook it for weakness. When you stayed steady, they assumed you'd always be there. When you didn't play games, they didn't know how to value you. But time has a way of revealing truths that presence could not. And one day, Maybe not now, maybe not soon. They will realize what they lost. They'll remember your warmth in the cold arms of someone else. They'll search for your understanding in conversations that never reach that depth. They'll replay your goodbye and wonder how they let silence speak louder than love. But by then, you'll be somewhere quieter, not waiting, not bitter, just at peace. Because the people who cannot meet you in your fullness were never meant to keep you in their smallness. And sometimes, it takes walking away for your worth to echo. The art of leaving without hate. You don't need to hate them to let them go. In fact, it's the hatred, the bitterness, the need to be right, the silent war playing out in your head that keeps you bound to what's already over. Because underneath all that noise is grief. The grief of knowing they couldn't love you in the way you hoped. The grief of realizing you gave them something rare, and they weren't ready. The grief of staying long enough to see that love alone isn't enough to make someone safe. You want to hate them because it feels like protection. Because if you can make them the villain, maybe it'll hurt less. Maybe it'll justify the loneliness. Maybe it'll distract you from the ache of a quiet, uncelebrated departure. But hate is just love's armor. And you're tired of armor. The deeper strength, the rarest form of resilience, is found not in rage, but in release, in saying, I will not carry this pain any further. I will not make myself smaller to fit the narrative. I will not bleed to prove that I felt something real. Because you did. You did feel something real. And the tragedy isn't that you love them. It's that they didn't know what to do with that love. Still, you can walk away without poisoning the well. You can leave without closure, without revenge, without begging them to understand. You can say nothing and still say everything. This is the art of leaving without hate. It's choosing to detach not in anger, but in self-respect. It's refusing to shrink your heart just because someone else couldn't meet it. It's realizing that your peace matters more than your explanation. It's knowing that no matter how kind you were, how patient, how present, some people can only meet you through the lens of their own limitations. And that is not your responsibility to fix. You do not need their validation. You do not need their apology. You do not need their sudden clarity. You only need one thing: to choose yourself fully, finally, and without guilt. Let them keep their version of the story. Let them stay confused about why you stopped reaching out. Let them sit with the absence they didn't think would matter. Your silence now is not punishment. It is protection. It is power. It is healing. And one day, when you think back on this, you won't remember the chaos. You'll remember the quiet, the moment you chose to walk away. Not because you stopped loving them, but because you started loving yourself more. That's the kind of ending that doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be true. And when you leave without hate, you leave clean. You don't drag the past into your future. You don't become what hurt you. You become free. You were the light. They may never tell you they miss you. They may never say the words. Never reach out. Never admit that they've replayed the sound of your voice, your laughter in the quiet, your warmth in the cold, space you used to occupy. But they will feel it. Oh, they will feel it. Not all at once. Not like a crash, but slowly, like light slipping under a closed door. They'll feel it in the people who don't quite get them, in conversations that don't reach that depth, in eyes that look at them but don't truly see. They'll look for you in others, not consciously, not proudly, but involuntarily, as if their nervous system remembers what their pride tried to forget. You were the one who stayed long after it hurt, the one who tried to understand them, even when they couldn't understand themselves, the one who kept showing up until you didn't. And it's in your absence that they'll finally hear the truth. You weren't clingy. You weren't weak. You weren't asking for too much. You were the light, and they mistook it for a spotlight, never realizing it was the lantern guiding them out of their own darkness. You may never witness their regret, but you don't need to, because your healing was never dependent on their apology. Your closure didn't come from their words. It came from your decision to walk, not out of bitterness, but out of reverence for your own heart. You were never asking for perfection, just presence, just effort, just someone who could hold space for the love you offered so freely. And now, you will never again beg to be seen. You will never again explain your worth to someone who wasn't ready to receive it. You will never again confuse emotional chaos with passion, or distance with depth, or silence with strength. You've learned to love without losing yourself. You've learned that not all departures need permission. You've learned that sometimes the softest exit echoes the loudest truth. So leave quietly, but leave completely. And when you do, don't look back to see if they've noticed. Just keep walking into a life where your love is met, where your tenderness is valued, where your presence isn't just tolerated, but treasured, because you were the light. And now, you carry it for yourself. If this message stirred something deep in you, share it. There's someone out there clinging to a love that's hurting them. Your courage to let go might become their reason to do the same. Drop a comment below if you've ever had to leave quietly. And if this resonates with your journey, subscribe, because healing doesn't have to be loud, but it should never be done alone.